Good evening, I'm Danielle Post. The Territory is facing the biggest deficit in close to 20 years. The Treasurer has defended his spending, saying it's needed to buoy the ACT through Commonwealth cuts. Andrew Barr is also leading major tax reform. ACT political reporter Luke Duffy was in the lockup today.
Well, Andrew Barr says it's a budget for fairness. At the heart of it, a major reform of the tax system, the biggest in the ACT's history. But the Treasurer is also dealing with one of the largest deficits the Territory's seen since self-government. This year's operating loss is $125 million. Next year, that's forecast to rise to $318.3 million, the biggest deficit in 17 years. Andrew Barr predicts the budget to remain in the red until 2015-16, when a surplus of $25 million is forecast. In his media address this afternoon, the Treasurer laid much of the blame at the feet of the Commonwealth.
We're not believers in delivering surpluses for the sake of that. That sort of fiscal Darwinism needs to come to an end in this country.
Now, because of those cuts in the federal budget, Andrew Barr says it's essential the ACT keeps spending to stimulate this economy, and that's what the budget has done. $900 million has been allocated to capital spending alone. That's the highest in history. More than $2 billion has been given just to health and education. But of course, in these tough times, cuts have to be made, and they're coming from the Territory's public service. $180 million will be saved over the next 4 years, mostly in administration and employee costs. Andrew Barr has stressed the cuts will not result in job losses.
We would anticipate being able to meet all of these job reductions in those areas through natural attrition and through some voluntary redundancies.
And now, as I mentioned, the centrepiece of this budget is the reform of the ACT tax system. The Treasurer has announced a 5-year program to begin that reform, and that will start tomorrow. As already announced, stamp duty will be abolished. Today, we also found out insurance tax will be completely phased out, saving the average household $375 a year. There'll also be cuts in land tax, but to make up for that lost revenue, general rates will rise by an average of $123 a year.
When people take a look at this tax reform package, they'll see the core values that are behind it, and they will understand the economic imperative that has driven this change.
In this election year, the Treasurer is aware that his first budget could well be his last, and with that in mind, there will certainly be some number crunching to come.
Luke Duffy there. Whilst tax reform was high on the agenda, the front line is where the government says it's delivering funding in health, education and emergency services.
New investments, new initiatives, whatever it's being called, the Treasurer is spending.
It's about supporting this economy, this community and supporting jobs.
Much of it will be in health, $1.2 billion. Extra funding for 40 new beds across both public hospitals and 150 more jobs.
Most people come to hospital to be nursed, so the majority of it will be nursing staff, but there will be extra doctors, and to accompany that there will be extra allied health professionals.
A boost for education brings spending to $900 million. Taylor Primary School received its promised $12.9 million. Money will also go into improving the quality of teaching.
It's all about ensuring that the highest quality teachers, who are paid six-figure salaries, are fronting classrooms in disadvantaged areas in the city.
In emergency services, there's $9.5 million for 15 new paramedics, a one-off payment to the ESA to cover increases in costs, and $24.6 million for a new joint fire and ambulance station at Charnwood.
Work will commence this coming financial year, due for completion in 2014, and that improves fire and ambulance cover for one of the fastest growing parts of the city, West Belconnen.
With growth also comes new roads. There's $38 million for an extension of John Gorton Drive and $17 million for Uriara Road upgrades. A Gungahlin City Project Office will be established to drive the rapid transport link.
Regardless of which transport option you choose in that corridor, you need to have urban renewal. And it needs to be on a scale that I don't think Canberrans have seen before.
Improving public transport was also a government priority. 90 buses will be replaced at a cost of $48.5 million. Eleanor Mitchley, Win News.
Joining me now live in the studio is Treasurer Andrew Barr. Thank you for making time to be here tonight.
Thank you, Danielle.
Now, this is your first budget, which is forecast to slip $318 million into the red. Can you blame the Territory for being a little bit nervous?
What we're seeking to do is to keep our economy growing, to support jobs and ensure that Canberra continues to be a great place to live. And so we've taken a decision to have a measured return to surplus to ensure that this economy continues to grow.
Now, this budget, we've seen the impact on cost of living in black and white. Canberrans will pay an extra, say, $640 a year because of fees, and people are asking, how can you describe this as fair?
What we're seeking to do is reduce the costs on low and middle income households. So the range of tax changes that I've announced today actually reduce rates for a quarter of all properties in the ACT. Everyone benefits from a cut in insurance tax, so your home contents insurance and your motor vehicle insurance will be cheaper. So what we're seeking to do is deliver benefits to low and middle income households.
Now, and finally, Treasurer, why is tax reform so important to you right now?
It's about encouraging growth in our economy. It's about supporting the private sector. This is a great budget for business, and these tax reforms, particularly cutting payroll tax, will allow ACT businesses to employ more people, and we need more jobs and more private sector jobs in our economy.
And a 5-year phase-in, how do you think that will impact us here?
I think it's important to introduce these sorts of reforms gradually to give the economy time to adjust and to give people time to adjust. But people will benefit significantly from stamp duty cuts, from insurance cuts, and this means that cost of living will come down for low and middle income Canberrans.
Treasurer Andrew Barr, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Thank you. As always, the budget has received both praise and criticism from the community. The business sector has welcomed the spending to stimulate the economy, but welfare groups say there's not enough to help those who need it most.
The opposition claims the budget means more pain for households. Rates and utility charges will rise.
This is a massive slug on Canberra families, the biggest tax increase I think Canberra families have ever experienced.
The new home buyer concession scheme's threshold has increased, but the number of properties it applies to has fallen.
Most first home buyers under this budget will be paying more for their stamp duty than they would have previously.
Welfare groups are concerned about the rise in fees, but are hopeful low-income earners will be spared.
We hope that the work that is happening through some of those increased tax measures will be offset by the concessions for those who are least able to afford it.
Despite this, ACTCOS feels the disadvantaged have been forgotten.
The investment into the community sector, the sector that supports those when they're in need and at their most vulnerable, was not what we were hoping for.
Business is positive about the spending to save jobs.
It's been successful at insulating the ACT economy against the problems brought upon us by the federal budget.
The Greens don't share the Treasurer's view that it's an historic budget.
It's not the most earth-shattering budget, but considering the deficit, it had to obviously be a little restrained in its spending.
They have welcomed the tax reforms.
If we do want sustainable revenues into the future, we need to move to this type of tax system.
Luke Duffy, Win.